So welcome to our April program for our Backyard Wildlife Project on Camano, the Camano Wildlife Habitat Project. This is the 20th year we've been doing programs, so we're excited. Brenda, who will be speaking, she's helped us out numerous times for both programs and our Habitat Stewards training. So I'll introduce her after I give you a little bit of a spiel. So we do these projects so people know about our Camano Wildlife Habitat Project and can be part of it. So here's a little bit to know. We're on Camano and we're an island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. And at the moment we have 1,010 certified wildlife habitats on the island, and they're spread all throughout. And by doing that, we're kind of connecting corridors. So when you look at this map of Camano, between 1984 and 2020, we've lost a lot of habitat. And so in that time, there's been the Growth Management Act that is supposed to kind of help a little bit, but there are abilities to develop on the island, and that means what we can do in our own yards can make a difference. So thinking along the lines of what Russell Link talks about, he's a Fish and Wildlife biologist with the Department of Wildlife and Fish for the state. And he talks about area 1, area 2s, area 3s. Area 1s is how you is where you're at a lot. So what you do for habitat is maybe more limited than your area 3, which can be more wild, and your area 2 is kind of a mid zone. So if we connect those area 3s, we can kind of reestablish some corridors between yards and the parks on the island. So that's what our hope is with the Wildlife Habitat Project. And it is not hard to do. You can look at my yard when we moved in, and so it was just lawn, and there's a little bit of a planting bed there. And since then, that was 1995 when that, or 1994, I guess 90, when that photo was taken. And then this is the bottom with the little pathway, and the habitat restored on the left is 2007, and this is what it looks like now on the right-hand side. So we filled it in with ground cover, with shrubs, as well as trees. And so it's doing the layering that we recommend with a wildlife habitat, because the critters like different parts of the our yards. And so it's very lush and wonderful in the summer. Our neighbors have grass and dry grass on a hot summer day, and I go up there and I'm in the shade, and it's wonderful. We live down below, our neighbors live up on the hill. Okay, so to have a wildlife habitat, you're providing food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young, and also doing responsible gardening. So it's thinking about reducing lawn, using native plants, and all that works really well for water conservation. That's important on the island since we are a single source aquifer. Then reducing pesticides and fertilizer, and that is helpful both for the wildlife and for us, because we do get all our water from the ground. And so everything that goes into the ground seeps into our water system. And so by thinking about what we're doing in our yards and responsible, that makes us have good habitat, as well as in the yard, as well as in the sound, because it all goes into Puget Sound. So to do it is simple. There's an application. You can get this application on our website, camanowildlifehabitat.org. You can also apply online, and it's simple. You're just checking off how you're providing food, water, shelter, place to raise young, and how you're doing sustainable gardening. And you only need a couple of checks. For the first one, for food, you need 3 checks. For water, that's the most difficult. You just need 1. And for the others, you just need a couple of checks. Noting that this is a work in progress. You don't have to be a perfect habitat at the beginning. If you're still using pesticides and chemicals in your yard, you could still certify as a habitat, but later on you may think, well, why am I doing that? I'm feeding the birds, and this isn't good for them, and it's not good for me because of my water. So it's like, as you have your habitat certified, you're a little bit more conscientious, like, okay, my bird bath needs filling. I can add some water when I walk by, or when I'm going to get new plants, I can say, oh, native plants are going to be useful and beneficial rather than a sterile, pretty one that's ornamental. So You can also certify, I do have applications at the library. Inside I have the ones that are specific for Camano. Outside in the kiosk, I have ones that are generic for people that may live off island. If you send in the application that has the Camano address, I send it in Bird Dog to make sure it all goes through. And I get to count, so I know how many we have right away. And if you do it online, I hear about it later. And we have signs. So if you have a sign up, it kind of allows you to have a little bit of a messier wildlife habitat for a yard. And it's not so much messy, it's just things look more disheveled because you're purposely letting seeds hang on there for a while and not pruning and making everything really clean and tidy, and the grass isn't necessarily there anymore because you have strawberries as ground cover or kinnikinnick. And so if you have a sign in yard art, then it all looks purposeful. So our sign is $15, and Bev Paulson is the artist, and Pilar, she designed it for us. You can also get the National Wildlife Federation Ranger Rick sign, and they both are doing the same thing. They're saying this is a certified wildlife habitat providing food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young. And I get calls from people that say, oh, I can do that if I want a sign. And you can have a sign, well, the cost $15.30 for the Ranger Rick, but you have to be a certified wildlife habitat and have your number in order to get the sign. So you can see we have quite a few backyard wildlife habitats on Camano, and you can see how they're linking up. We have neighborhoods on the island, so we have 9 neighborhood wildlife habitats. So if you are in a neighborhood that has a lot of wildlife habitats, I still have a sign that needs to have a place. So we figure 25% of a neighborhood, and we let people choose what their neighborhood is because it's kind of odd on the island. And you can see this is a bit of a trend. Tuck Willow was the very first in the state, and we were the second. Now there are 18 in the state, and there are 147 in the nation. We were the 10th certified habitat in the nation. And so we've been doing this for 20 years. We still need to continue working on being an island in harmony with nature, and we still need more habitats. We reached our 1,000 goal, so now we're working on 1,100. So please help us with that if you haven't certified, or tell your friends. Now there's something quite cool coming up. There's a Habitat Stewards training, and that will be the Seattle office of the National Wildlife Federation, the regional office in Seattle, is putting on this virtual Habitat Stewards training. So we did our last Stewards training in 2019, and we don't know when we'll do our next training, but this is a great way to do it through Zoom, and there's field trip opportunities, as well as when Brenda's talking today, she's the manager of the Solal Washington Native Plant Society's demonstration garden, and that is a great way to go learn plants, see them, and see how they're putting plants together in different types of areas. So if you're interested, there's the contact information. I kind of pulled out the important things from the poster. I will post this on the chat as soon as I'm done talking. But this is a great opportunity. I think it's, yeah, $20. So it's a pretty good deal for 4 nights of learning and then some opportunities to go check out habitats if you want. And here's where you can get more information. The National Wildlife Federation has a great website. It has different information about plants on that too. And then our information. Roxy's done a great job with our website, and you can go and look at different programs that we've done in the past, like Scott Chase's program on drain fields is real popular. I think it has about 1,000 views so far. And here are some references. The one on the top, Living with Wildlife and Landscaping for Wildlife. This is by Russell Link, the guy that I talked about, the fish and wildlife biologist. So this is specific for the Pacific Northwest. He's the one that talked about the different areas I mentioned at the beginning. And then the Attracting Birds and Butterflies and Other Backyard Wildlife is by David Mizujus. I forget how to pronounce his name. I've met him, I think. But anyway, David M. there, this is a new edition of that book, and that is more general than the two on the top. And with that, we thank all of you who are certified as wildlife habitats. Please tell your friends so that we continue our mission of being an island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. And with that, I want to introduce Brenda. So I will unshare here. Okay, and so let me tell you about Brenda before she talks about native plants. So Brenda is both a biologist and an artist. She's worked for the National Park Service, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. She's retired as the stewardship director for the Skagit Land Trust, and now she manages the Washington Native Plant Society Salal Garden or display garden. And I know she led us on different field trips up there for habitat stewards training, and she's talked to us many times about native plants. So it's really a treat to have her with us again tonight. So welcome, Brenda. And I want to mention the sale that she's kind of putting on with the Salal display garden as well. She'll tell you that too. But anyway, so welcome, Brenda. Thank you so much again and again.
Thanks. So that was great. I'll share my screen, and it may take a moment to come up. And then I know Roxy may spotlight me, but I might turn off my video just to make sure that my audio is not all jerky. But we'll start with screen sharing here. Okay. Is that showing up okay?
Looks great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to stop. So I appreciate people coming to this program. I know I've presented to you guys several times, and it was with the Zoom enabling there to be recordings of programs. I said to Roxy, "Oh, but you've already recorded me. You know, is that going to mean I have to come up with something completely different?" But I realized over time, I of course changed the program a little bit, and a number of times I've been asked to talk about climate resiliency and drought tolerance. And then of course, Val and Roxy told me about how popular the program was about the drain fields. And so I actually watched that one to see if I could get some ideas off of it. And I know that Roxy put together a survey to ask your members what they were interested in seeing information about, and it included drought tolerance, planting on drain fields, pollinators. I'm going to try to basically talk about all of that or touch on that, but so there'll be a little bit different information than if you've attended one of my programs before. Hopefully this will be a little bit different. So the idea here is to talk about using native plants, as Val alluded to, rather than ornamental varieties that are more sterile and not really feeding the insects and the birds in your habitat like our native plants do. So I just came up with the phrase functional landscape. And my main point is this is an example of primroses being used as just kind of, I call it eye candy, where they pop them in. After a while, you know, when they get rained on, they get kind of icky and chewed on, which is good. I mean, if insects are eating them, that's a good sign. But eventually people will rip these out and put in something different. And that disrupts the ecosystem in the soil, the bugs and the insects and the worms that have been in association with each other, and the plants in the soil get disrupted when you rip them out. And it's really not a sustainable system for wildlife or for the insect life in our soil. So I just want people to start thinking about plants as part of an ecosystem and not just something pretty to look at. I mean, we all enjoy looking at plants, but think about more of the functions that plants have and what they're doing for us. This big wheel has a lot of examples on it of things that plants do for us. Collectively are called ecosystem services. And the ones I'll talk about today mostly are probably related to, you know, flood control, climate regulation, clean water, filtering our water. Pollination is a huge one that's very important to us. and certainly recreation, aesthetics, spirituality. There's a lot of value in the forest bathing, things like that, that, you know, we get a lot of benefit health-wise from plants, biodiversity, habitat. All of these things are collectively called ecosystem services. And those are things that we would, we rely on plants to provide for us. And if we didn't have plants, we would have to pay for those things to happen. I mean, flood control is a great example. You know, you take out the mangroves and you have hurricanes hitting the shoreline. Well, you're going to have damage and you end up paying more than if you had just retained your mangroves. So same thing happens along the Skagit River or other places where we have flooding. And Val's already, you know, mentioned, she wasn't specifically talking about native plants, but they are beneficial for reducing the amount of maintenance and input that we have to put into our system, and which may in turn then get into your water. So native plants are adapted to our soils and climates. We do have, you know, obviously wet winters, maybe possibly getting wetter, and dry summers, maybe getting drier. So adapted plants that are adapted to that regime already are going to do better. Native plants use less water. If you go to our native plant garden, that display garden, keep in mind, any time of year you go there, but especially in the summer, we don't water any of the landscape there. So we may water the first time we plant something, but basically I don't have any plans to even turn the water on in the garden there. So we plant things at the appropriate time where we can minimize, you know, in the fall when we minimize how much watering we have to do, and they develop long, deep roots, and we really don't have to water. And we don't use fertilizers. We do put fertilizers in our potted plants, our potted stock, because they are restricted in what nutrients they're going to get. But keep in mind, if you're walking through the display garden, that we're not using fertilizers. And I don't use fertilizers at my own house for the native plants either. And then there's lower maintenance. So I don't have, my own yard is not a purist landscape of nothing but native plants. I have fruit trees and vegetable gardens, grapevines, but I want to spend my time maintaining those. And the benefit of having a lot of native plants is those areas require very little maintenance. So I can spend my time on the fruit trees and, you know, the other parts of my yard vegetables that I want to spend more of my maintenance energy on. The other thing to me that native plants do for us is, oh, if I can move this thing, yeah. To me, what native plants do for us is give us a sense of place. We live, I think, in one of the most beautiful places in the country, and I have lived a couple other parts of the United States. And if you just use the standard trees and shrubs that are available at commercial nurseries that are produced in mass to be distributed to people all over the country, you end up with a feeling of, well, I could be anywhere. If I sat down in a neighborhood and saw a white birch and a mugo pine, and, you know, I don't want to bash those plants. Those are wonderful plants, but they are grown by a nursery trade that has picked them out because they do well everywhere. So it turns out that you could be anywhere when you see some of those plants that are so available readily in the commercial nurseries. But if you put a Pacific rhododendron in, or, you know, had one of these lovely stumps or a snag, that's quite a different. It really says it's the Northwest. Okay. And the shooting stars do well here. I have some blooming in my yard right now, and they, of course, always remind me of places that I have been to where I've seen big fields of shooting stars. So that's the other thing they do for me, is remind me of favorite places in the Northwest. And this is kind of a new idea too, is using native plants to develop or produce resiliency in your community, resiliency towards climate change, providing more and more habitat for the birds and the wildlife, maybe absorbing more water during the winter. So there's a lot of things that we can incorporate. If we provide more of the landscape in a more of a natural state, it's more likely that some of these other things we enjoy will survive. So when it comes to choosing native plants, so you got this huge palette of plants to choose from, but just as with any kind of gardening, it's important to use the right place, right plant, right place principles. That is, just because a plant is native doesn't mean it can survive anywhere. If you have a plant that's really needs a good drainage, you don't want to put it in a swampy part of your yard. You want to make sure you've got the right exposure, the right amount of sun, wind, all that stuff. So just because it's native doesn't mean it will survive anywhere in your yard. You also, of course, want to determine what are the things you're looking for. You can choose your plants based on whether you're looking for winter interest or food for wildlife or food for yourself. And then there are these plant finder guides and plant lists. I'm going to show you some websites, and then at the end of the program, I'll leave the page up that has the websites on it. And we can probably share those. I know this is recorded, but we can also share those someplace where you can find them again and not have to write them down. And then, as Val was saying, visit display gardens. The Salal Display Garden is open dawn to dusk for visiting, but there are other display gardens around Western Washington that would be good to visit and get ideas. So here are some of these plant guides. I think my favorite one, the easiest one to use, is run by King County. If you, in your browser, if you just put the words King County Native Plant Guide, you would come up with this Go Native site that has a searchable list where you can click on different characteristics. I'm looking for a evergreen ground cover that likes shade, and you put in those characteristics and it'll give you a short list of species. And you can do that for sun, flowers, whatever characteristics you're looking for. The Washington Native Plant Society has a growing list of resources on their website as well. It's not interactive like the King County one is. And then people may not realize, but National Audubon for 4 or 5 years now has really been pushing native plants. And so they've been developing some resources for people because they've seen the strong connection between the survival of birds and the presence of native plants. So it turns out, birds in particular, when they're feeding their young, they need to be finding larvae and bugs to feed to their young. And it's our native plants that host those things. So as I like to say, if you have a lovely cultivar or a plant that you got at the nursery that you love it because its leaves are never eaten, it always looks perfect and pristine. Well, it's kind of like having a sculpture in your yard. It's really not feeding the bugs and the insects that the birds are relying on. So Audubon has this huge resource now about plants for birds where you can go on and put your zip code in and search out plant species and actually look at how many different species of butterflies and moths depend on which species of plants that would grow in your area. It's quite a cool site. And then I always am checking the Burke Herbarium website. This website has maps of Washington state and has the outlines of the counties on it as well. And it's always a good place to just double check. If somebody tells you, oh, this is a native plant, it's yada, yada, yada. And then you go and I always look it up to make sure that truly is found in Washington. I do say, because of our warming, hotter, drier summers and wetter winters, there are a lot of plants from Oregon and even Northern California that do quite well up here. And we may be seeing cases for assisted migration, so to speak, is to be planting things that are actually not native to Washington, but native to Oregon. I don't think that's necessarily a horrible thing to do. So this is the entrance to our display garden. that's over at the WSU Research Station. And I think, yeah, I've got a map here. So this is an aerial view. If you haven't been to the research station before, if you were going, through Mount Vernon, and then you head out as if you're going to Anacortes, you're on Memorial Drive, which is also known as State Route 536, and you'll pass the big WSU Research Station, which is a cool thing in itself. I mean, they do a ton of really interesting research at that station for agriculture in Western Washington. And then just beyond the entrance to the campus buildings, there's an entrance to our display gardens. And there are, these are open to the public. WSU owns the property, but lets us use them. And they're very supportive and helpful in many ways in maintaining these gardens. The biggest one, outlined here in red, is managed by the Skagit County Master Gardeners. And I think they say there are 27 different themed gardens in there. So when I mean that, there's an enabling garden that shows you how to have raised beds or have plants that are scented or have good feel to them. There's a rose garden, there's a vegetable bed, there's an herb garden. There's a garden just of rhododendrons and another garden of, I can't think of what, there's so many different ones, and there's small fruits and irises and grasses. So lots of things. And the best thing is there's a toilet block there too. So this is always a good stop for family and friends when they're visiting. You can get out, stretch your legs, have a walk around the gardens. Other big garden there is a fruit orchard. So I believe this started out as a research station project of testing different fruit varieties. And when WSU decided to close that down, a group of volunteers stepped up, and they've been maintaining these fruit trees. There's pears and apples. All the different varieties are identified, lots of grapes, blueberries, raspberries, all kinds of things, and kiwis. They have field days where you can come out and learn about the different fruit trees and how to maintain them. So Western Washington Fruit Growers Association. And then this littlest garden in the back, this is the Native Plant Society garden. And we're just trying to illustrate landscaping plants, ones that are appropriate for home landscaping in Western Washington. You may see a few plants in here that are native to southwestern Washington, like around Rainier or so, but do well here. And then others that we see on both the east and the west side of Washington. But we're really trying to illustrate what works well in Western Washington. We're not trying to show every possible plant in Western Washington, but rather what are ones that you might find appealing for a home landscape. So I wanted to go over some of these. Now, people said that they wanted, they were especially interested in drought tolerance and pollinators. Sometimes those things combine very well, sometimes they don't. So I'll try to say something about each of those subjects with these species. I'm just going to go over some of the top species for this functionality for providing habitat for wildlife, because that's what you guys are all about, right? So bitter cherry, it turns out, according to National Wildlife Federation, the plants in the genus Prunus, like bitter cherry, are the biggest in the West. They are the best producers of food for butterflies and moth larvae. So if you want to support butterflies and moths, if you can find a place for a bitter cherry in your yard, that's great. They're also so popular with bees, feeding on the flowers, and I'm sure hummingbirds do too, and other birds. So those butterfly larvae would be feeding on the leaves of these trees, and then you would see chickadees grabbing those butterfly larvae, and some will survive and become butterflies, but some will become baby birds. So bitter cherry is a great plant to introduce to your yard. Cascara is another one that's super popular with, again, bees, and birds feed on the oops, I was thinking I had a picture of the the fruit, but I don't. So cascara is very tolerant of both dry and very wet habitat. So I think of this as one that would fit your drought tolerant interests. And yeah, it produces a nice flower and then a black berry that the birds like to eat. Our native birch looks very similar to the white birch, but it has more of a salmony colored bark to it. And it also produces these pretty leaves that turn golden in the fall. So to me, it's a great alternative to the non-native Eastern birch that is so common. And again, it tolerates a lot of different habitats. We have one oak species in Western Washington. That's the Gary oak, also known as the Oregon white oak. If you haven't, well, I'm sure many of you, or if not all of you, have been to Oak Harbor. Some people are surprised to learn that Oak Harbor is named after Gary oak. And as you get further west into kind of the rain shadow, and as you go further south in Washington state, the oaks get bigger and bigger. And I highly recommend, if you're going through Oak Harbor and you have just 5 extra minutes, get off Highway 20, the busy street, the strip mall street, and find your way to a place called Smith Park. And it's in the old part of Oak Harbor. It's not very far off of Highway 20 at all. And it's stunning. There are these really old oak trees. It's just a square block that is nothing but oak trees with grass, like camas flowers and wild grass underneath the oak trees. It's been used as a picnic area for at least a century, if not 150 years or so. And the oak trees in that neighborhood are stunning. You'll just have a new appreciation for the Gary oak if you see that. And as we have Gary oaks in, I'm in Skagit County in Mount Vernon. There's some on Samish Island, and there's some along Chuckanut Drive. And that's the very furthest north that they grow naturally. And then as you head south, you get them more and more common. So they do like well-drained soils. I would imagine they would like Camano Island quite well. And to me, they just have a beautiful leaf too. It's not very big. It's a smaller leaf. Another really good drought tolerant, but also tolerant of flooding, is the shore pine. In the Rockies, the same species is called lodgepole pine, but here in the far west, it grows in more of a contorted fashion. It's you find it along the shorelines of the coast of Washington state, but it's amazingly tolerant of poor soils, whether it be thin or dry or even wet soils. It's a good competitor, a great evergreen. I think we're going to see more and more use of shore pine as our summers get drier and hotter and winters get wetter. I think it's going to be the winner of the conifers here. But yeah, I'm not an expert, but that's what my opinion is. So moving on to shrubs, again, important shrubs for wildlife, for the larvae, are anything in the willow family, salix. There's a lot of willow species. If you have the room to put a willow in your yard, that's a great addition for wildlife. Evergreen huckleberry is a very popular tree or shrub I wasn't even familiar with. I live in Mount Vernon, as I say, and it really doesn't occur that far east. But as you go to Whidbey Island, I would think Camano Island probably has tons of evergreen huckleberry, but it adds a nice evergreen interest. It can be tamed to something very much like a Japanese holly. You can make it into a hedge or a little very formal shrub, or you can let it go kind of wild. The new growth on it is red, has red leaves. It's very pretty. It's one of the very first bloomers in the spring. It blooms starting in February or March, and the bees, it's the first thing that they're going to feed on when they come out, and hummingbirds feed on it as well. Little tiny lantern flowers, just like any huckleberry. would produce. And but the birds and the bees both know how to find that. So it's a great shrub to have in your yard. I kind of put these in the order in which they bloom, I guess. The tall Oregon grape blooms just a little bit later than the evergreen huckleberry. Again, I've seen hummingbirds feeding on this as well as bees. The yellow flowers are very attractive to them. And it produces a nice fruit that is edible for us. I've made jelly out of it. It's pretty good. It's a great hedgerow plant because it's kind of spiky and it's evergreen. So it can grow tall, and you can put it, if you have a place. A lot of times people will come to me and say, I'm looking for a plant to put between me and my neighbor's, kitchen window or something like that. So it's a great screening plant. Pacific Ninebark is probably the next one to start blooming, and is important for wildlife. One of my volunteers had been trying to collect seeds from Pacific Ninebark because he really wanted to start propagating some from seed, or at least give that a try. You can do it from cuttings as well. But he said for a couple of years in a row, he couldn't find any seeds, and he was puzzled about that until he discovered it was because the bush tits were eating them all. So, again, another plant that's great for wildlife because of that seed source and the nectar and the flowers. Beaked hazelnuts will attract, of course, jays and squirrels, all kinds of animals that like the hazelnut. It's just like a filbert, except very small. I mean, the fruit is like a filbert, but not really of interest to people because it is so small. I'm sure you could make a meal out of it, but it's a wonderful shrub, usually with multiple trunks like this one shows, and kind of growing up in a vase or arching situation there. And this is why it's called beaked hazelnut. You can see the long beak on the cover there, and they're always twinned like that. And this one will, again, tolerate a lot of different habitat types. I mean, sun, shade, wet, dry. It's quite tolerant. And serviceberry blooms a little bit later yet and produces a fruit that people enjoy, as well as the birds and the wildlife. Good picture of the serviceberry fruit. Serviceberry, I read an interesting article, I think it was maybe in Harper's years ago, kind of an ode to serviceberry, because as a genus, there are serviceberries that grow all across the United States. And it's kind of one of those plants that you could have grown up with it in any part of the United States. And there are different species in some parts of the West, like in Utah, and I think in the Midwest too. The berry is quite large. It's a different species, and it becomes an important fruit for local people to collect and make into preserves. Red elderberry. I a lot of times tell people about this, and because of the hollow stems, we think it might turn out to be important for bees to overwinter, because they can burrow down into these stems. So again, as Val was saying, this is an excuse to leave your yard a little bit unkempt. I want to put up a sign. Maybe we could collectively make a nice sign about how we're leaving the stems for the bees, because I feel like I need to put one in my front yard. That there's a lot of goldenrod stems in my front yard, and I know I want to leave red elderberry stems up as well through the winter for the bees. But if you're ever wanting to attract, so this has these beautiful flowers in the spring that are white, and then it produces red berries that are not very edible for us. I mean, they're very, very tart, and I wouldn't recommend eating them. I think they're not palatable to us. But the tanagers, Western tanagers, really love the red elderberry berries. So we go to places where we know there are red elderberries and can count on being able to see tanagers later in the summer. And then one of the last bloomers I wanted to put in here was ocean spray. Again, looking for plants that bloom. I should have said this at the beginning, looking for plants that bloom throughout the season. So in February, I had Evergreen Huckleberry I mentioned. And then here at the end of the season in August, we've got ocean spray blooming, just trying to feed those pollinators year round. And then there are tons of herbaceous plants, things that die back to the ground that you can grow in your yard. Just some of the examples that, again, I think I had pulled these out as ideas for attracting and supporting pollinators like bees, in that we're looking for plants that have hollow stems or plants that have stems that are left through this winter that bees may be burrowing into. And that's something you can always just look for on your own too, as you go around your yard, maybe cleaning up the stems in the fall. You might note to yourself, oh, this one is hollow. Like I've noticed fireweed, of course, has hollow stems, and you could actually make a mason bee house out of your fireweed stems. But the other thing is to just leave the fireweed stems up as long as you can tolerate, and or break them off and put them on the ground. And I think bees will use them. So plants like that, just doing your own observations and noting what plants provided habitat for the animals you're trying to attract. Big leaf lupin is another good one. Meadow-rue. This one, it looks even better right now in this spot. This is in our Salal display garden, Salal chapter display garden. And you can see towards the back of this picture, there's a lot of horsetail. And this was a place where we had a ton of horsetail underneath some aspen trees. And one of our volunteers pointed out that we had a little patch of meadow-rue, and the meadow-rue grows at the same rate as the horsetail, and it kind of has the same color green. And so she said, why don't we just plant more meadow-rue under there rather than struggling trying to control the horsetail? And it really worked. We got a bunch more meadow-rue, and it spreads by rhizomes just under the surface. So we planted a bunch in there, but now it's filled in completely. And I'm sure if the meadow-rue were to go away, the horsetail would come back in full force. But in the meantime, we really can't even see the horsetail in there. It's so insignificant and reduced, but it's also masked. You know, it's there, but we're not seeing it. Oh, this is a close-up picture of the meadow-rue flower. And then just wanted to go over a few ferns that are sword ferns, of course, I think of the go-to evergreen fern. I encourage you to plant them close together, then you won't have to do any weeding. You can make a nice evergreen area anywhere in your yard with where there's some shade, I should say. They don't tolerate full sun, but sword ferns are people, they're so common, people don't think of them as a great habitat plant, but they really are, because those dead fronds kind of fall down in the winter, and you'll find birds scratching around, and insects, I'm sure, are burrowing and living under there during the winter. So they become important shelter and habitat for birds. Deer fern, again, it's another species of fern that's evergreen, and I encourage you to plant it close together, and then you have really a nice solid mass. And for low maintenance, you don't have to do any weeding between them. And deer fern is unique in that the fronds that you see that are green are fertile are sterile fronds. They don't have any spores on them. But during the summer, deer ferns send up these other very interesting looking fronds that have the spores on them. And then those break off during the winter. They're kind of ephemeral, but they're a really interesting aspect of deer ferns. And then 3 deciduous ferns, that is, these will die back completely to the ground during the winter, so they're only just now emerging. Maidenhair is always a popular one. It's so pretty. A lot of people think they have to have a wet waterfall feature or some kind of pond to have Maidenhair Fern, but Maidenhair actually tolerates just ordinary garden soil. You know, they want some shade, but as I say, I'm here in Mount Vernon. I don't have any waterfalls in my yard and nothing spraying water on these guys. And I've got 3 or 4 Maidenhair Ferns in the yard. They do just fine. Lady Fern can be a really pretty display with the light colored green. And oak ferns. Oak fern are, again, spread rhizomatously. They spread by rhizomes just under the surface, and they don't grow very tall. So if you're looking for a deciduous evergreen or deciduous ground cover, they probably only get 4 or 5 inches off the ground. And then I'm going to have some pictures here of sunny ground covers. I thought about this question of what to plant on drain fields and trying to think of native species. And there are quite a few native species that are shallow rooted and make good ground covers. Mountain avens is one of them. It's the plant in the foreground here with the white flower. It does turn kind of a brownish color in the winter, but then the leaves green up again in the summer. So it's already starting to bloom at my house right now. This is from my front yard. So it tolerates full sun, wants full sun. So it would be a good one for the drain field, shallow rooted. Later in the summer, it produces this seed head that the kids in the neighborhood kind of like because of the little tufts. It's like a Dr. Seuss plant. So that's mountain avens. I was only introduced to it from, I guess we were buying it from a nursery, commercial nursery for our plant sale. And a friend of mine pointed out that he has a lot of it in his yard in Anacortes. Its native habitat is at about, I want to say 5,000 to 6,000 feet in the Cascade Mountains, but it does just fine down here for some reason. So I plant it frequently, and just lately have been seeing bumblebees searching in it for places to burrow. So I think they do like the little nooks and crannies and shelter that it provides. I think also for your drain fields, any of the Stonecrop, their genus is called sedum, and there are many species, 4 or 5 species in Western Washington that are native, and then there's lots of non-native ones too, but you could have a really fun garden of Stonecrop on a drain field. And of course, they're very drought tolerant. All these things are. And beach strawberry too. This is, I think, one of our best. We have 3 species of strawberries in Western Washington that are native. To me, this is the best one because it's the most evergreen. It has this dark green, shiny leaf and looks good year round. So it makes, it's a very fast growing, spreading ground cover. So if you want to minimize how much you have to spend on covering a lot of ground, beach strawberry is a good plant to go with. I would not put these in my drain field. Camus bulbs, Camus, which Native Americans eat, and it's a beautiful plant and self-seeds and spreads, but the bulbs burrow deeper and deeper each year. So you probably don't want to put that in a drain field. But I don't know if I have a picture in here of a hummingbird feeding on the Camus, but they definitely do. And it's, it's a great pollinator plant. And it's a beautiful early bloomer. It doesn't mind being in a soggy place. So if you have, a yard that's wet in the winter and dry in the summer, Camus will be just fine. Oh yeah, here's my hummingbird picture of it feeding in the display garden. Trillium, again, our native bulbs are used to our wet winters, dry summers. So again, Trillium, you wouldn't want to put it in a place where it's just going to be saturated all winter, but it actually can tolerate pretty wet situation and shade. In this case, the Camus likes sun, Trillium wants shade, and then they'll die back when we have our dry summers. They're blooming right now, the Trillium. And people do sometimes ask about moving Trillium. The best, if you have a source of Trillium, like, you know, your yard or maybe a forest that you own or you have permission to collect Trillium from, just mark the spot and come back in the fall. It's really not worth trying to dig them up in the summer. You'll just end up, it'd be like digging up a tulip bulb in the spring. You know, you're going to break off the top and the whole plant will die. So moving Trillium in the fall is really the best time. Which kind of brings me to buying native plants. There's some really good sources. We're very lucky. The conservation districts have terrific sales in the spring. They're all getting earlier, which is important. I think that they are selling the plants in February or March so that the plants are still dormant and you can get them in the ground before they break dormancy. But that does mean that right now it's too late to get things from the conservation districts, but you can always plan for next year. Get on their mailing lists. The Snohomish Conservation District is super. So is Skagit. And I would check out all the conservation districts to see what they have, because they each have a different list of species that they'll be selling. Washington Native Plant Society. During COVID, we transitioned to doing online sales and scheduling pickups of the plants. So it had been that we would have in-person sales that were kind of a mad rush to get in and grab plants really quickly. And it was not the best system. The online version is sort of the same, except that it's online and you're not pushing against each other. But there is kind of a mad rush, unfortunately, at the beginning of the sales. And then we have a system for appointments for picking up the plants later. So somebody put in the chat, our Salal chapter sale opened yesterday, and it's very close to being sold out, but there's still some really good plants available. We have a tab in our sale called Not Sold Out, just for that purpose. And we started out with maybe 130 species and we're down to about 25 species, but some of them are very good still. You know, we've got a couple different ferns that are kind of hard to get, and Ninebark and some trees still. And yeah, so it's worth checking out. But you can definitely get on our mailing list for our fall sale. So we'll be doing trees and shrubs and maybe some penstemons and things that still look good in the fall. And just send an email. If you go to, well, I'll put my email in the chat, but you can send me an email and I can add you to the mailing list. I'm a Skagit County Master Gardener, and I'm happy to say that they're carrying more and more native plants at their plant fair. So it's worth checking that out on May 7th at the Skagit County Fairgrounds. From 8 to 2 is the plant fair this year. If you have a favorite nursery, especially if they know your face, you know, ask them about native plants and what their native plant section has in it. Most nurseries will have a section devoted to native plants, and it's definitely worth checking out. There are, you guys are fortunate in that, I would say from Arlington to Monroe to Duval and Carnation, there are a lot of wholesale nurseries, and some of them for native plants, and some of them do sell retail. So just kind of Google that and check out what nurseries might be in your area if you're looking for more trees and shrubs. They're mostly catering to the landscape. And then mail order, like these pink flowers in this picture. These are Clarkia, which are an annual plant, but they're a winter annual. So they grow they bloom in June, go to seed, throw the seed down, the plants sprout and are just little tiny green plants all winter long under the snow. And then they resprout and they're ready to go first thing in the spring. So these are annual plants that are easy to grow from seed. But I find there's a number of penstemons and other plants that you can order from catalogs or local nurseries here and grow them from seed too. I told you I would put up this at the end. That's I pulled a lot of information from the Xerces Society publication. They have a nice one for the Northwest region. Xerces Society is devoted to the conservation and protection of insects. So if you want information about pollinators in the Northwest, they especially are focused on planting species of plants that will bloom throughout the longest season that you can get from, say, February to September in the Northwest to provide for pollinators. That Northwest Native Plant Guide for King County that I was talking about, Washington Native Plant Society has resources. The easiest way to get to that is just WNPS.org. And the National Wildlife Federation has this plant finder tool as well. That's a really cool one, again, where you can look up what species of plants would host the most number of pollinators in your zip code or in your area. See some questions coming in. I should have been monitoring that and I didn't. Let's see. I'm going to put in my email and people can just email me there and I can add you to, there is a way to subscribe yourself to our mailing list, but if you wanted to get on our mailing list for sales, that would be the way to go. But let me look at these questions here. Oh, it's people, thank you, whoever did that, Val or Roxy, putting the links in there. Oh, so somebody asked about bees hibernating outside a hive. So our native bees, mostly bumblebees, are actually hardworking at pollinating compared to honeybees. So honeybees are colonial. They're native to Europe, and they came here about 400 years ago because they are an important insect for people settling the United States. They wanted to have the honey and the pollination services that bees provide. But our native bees are not so colonial. They are like mason bees, are even called solitary bees. They don't have the division of like drones and queens and worker bees. Each bee, female bee, can lay eggs and raise young. So those are solitary bees. They mostly burrow. I think something like 60 to 70% of our bumblebees burrow in the ground. So one of the other things that they recommend for bees is to leave some maybe I can stop screen sharing at this point. You want to leave some ground uncovered by mulch. So you don't want to cover every bit of your soil with mulch. You want to leave some open ground, or like in the case of those strawberries or the, what was the other plant? The dryas, the mountain avens that I was mentioning, is there is some loose ground or open soil that's underneath there. So the bees tend to go down even underneath the sword ferns. They'll go down in bunch grasses and burrow into the soil. So the native habitat for bees is to burrow individually. Oh, thank you. And Kramer mentions this. Yeah. Oh, it's too bad it's from Amazon. I'll try to find a source of it from that's elsewhere. But yeah, thanks for that. Pardon our weeds. We're feeding the bees. Although, yeah, it's a good start. I don't want to tell people what I have in my yard are weeds. So, bird's nest in sword ferns. That's great. Yeah. Do you think it's like towhees, or Roxy, did you have a?
Yeah, I think towhees and juncos.
Yeah, so the ground nesting birds that are
we've
really looking for cryptic places where they won't get found by cats or whatever. Yeah.
We often have to put up signs on our garden tours to stay away from the sword ferns because of the birds.
Oh,
so
that's
do you
great.
have anything to say about leaving the sword fern fronds or cutting them and leaving them in place? What do you do?
I leave them, but I know that people find, so what, just to explain to everybody, what some people do is from time immemorial, they've been cutting old fronds, like all the fronds from this year, cutting them off in early spring, like February or so, before the new fronds grow. If you do it early enough, you don't accidentally cut the new fronds, the fiddleheads. And then when you get your new fiddleheads or your new fronds come out, you have this incredible flush of all the same color, green, beautiful fronds. It looks gorgeous. But the thing is, you've lost a lot of the detritus and the cover. For like a month or two, you'll have just a nubbin of fiddleheads waiting to come out. And sometimes it actually kills the fern because the exposure to the cold, as we've had this year, really late cold weather. So I hesitate to do that. So I kind of have a compromise that I recommend to people if they really want to do that, is I say, the ones that are close to your sidewalk or the entrance to your door or that front row of ferns, maybe do those, but don't worry about 90% of your ferns. Just leave most of them if you can. So
and it also feeds the soil.
Opinion. I'm sorry?
It also feeds the soil, the fronds do.
Right. I mean, even when I cut them off, I don't carry them away.
Yeah.
I just scatter them around at the base. Maybe that's ugly. I don't know, but it's a lot of material to carry away from your site.
They're soon covered.
Yeah. So somebody asked if all the ferns are shade requiring. Pretty much, except they can tolerate a modest amount of sun. It's not like they have to be in deep shade. I think all of them can tolerate some degree of sun, just not full on all day sun. And the Meadow-roo, that's also kind of shade and sun. I see it in the mountains in sunny openings, but it probably wants partial shade. So somebody's wondering about their service berries. They're not getting much fruit. It could be there are ornamental ones where they might have tried to minimize the fruit because of the messiness.
Maybe they don't have pollinators.
Yeah. I bet you guys have a lot of pollinators around you though. Yeah, maybe there's no problem with Camus on drain field. I just would hate to have somebody's little holes be all plugged up by Camus bulbs. They're amazing drillers, as the years go on. You could have it won't be 4 feet down, but it could be 8 or 9 inches down. So, of course, you could harvest them. Let's see. What's a nice combo to go with Oregon grapes for semi-shade, dry slope? Maybe somebody else could suggest something here. Semi-shade.
I really like red flowering currants.
Mhm.
That's true.
That's true. And then there's another currant that it's native to Eastern Washington, but it does quite well here. And I could imagine on Camano Island, I should probably turn on a light in here, but on Camano Island, it would do really well is the golden currant. I don't know if people have seen that yet, but so friends in the Meadow have had it for years, and I just never thought about growing it over here, but one of my neighbors grows it, and now one of the nurseries I buy from is producing it too. And right now it's just loaded with yellow flowers. And I guess that would be just maybe not a great combination with the Oregon grape, because you've got yellow flowers with both of them. And I have to agree with Roxy about the red flowering currant with the Oregon grape. It'd be nice.
What about yellow twig dogwood? I don't know if that's a native or not.
I would be cautious about using, I just have a friend whose her front yard was taken over by that. And yeah, I don't think it's native. So it was a expensive project to get rid of it. But I haven't had trouble with the red twig at the garden.
I was just writing that we redid our lawn, which is the size of a park, that was full of weeds. Long story. But we planted about 30 red osier dogwood along about, I don't know, 6 feet from the road. So I'm really excited because I know they're a native and they're beautiful in the winter. And they also attract birds. At least I read that. So.
Yeah, no, and they have actually a nice flower, kind of in a flat display of flower, and then interesting berry. So yeah, and I think the trick with them, keeping them beautiful, is to cut out the biggest stems every year.
I've been doing my research, Brenda.
Oh, good.
I
turn on light here.
I watched a few YouTube videos on it, and some people are very specific about which ones to take out and how to do it. And so I know I have some work cut out because I have so many. So, but it'll probably be worth it, you know.
And I don't think you can hurt them. So they're very tolerant. So even if you feel like you didn't like your pruning job the first year, well, there's always next year.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a nice hedgerow that I did not plant the display garden. It was planted when I took over. It's 25 years old now. So it's a good place to come and see what things will look like at maturity, or close to maturity. And there's a hedge of red osier dogwood there, and it's really given me no trouble at all. I mean, probably every 3 years I send a volunteer in there to cut out the big bad stuff. We haul it away, but if I could do it every year, I would. But if you skip a year, it's really not the end of the world. So it hasn't popped up elsewhere. I mean, occasionally, but I think it's birds planting it probably.
Yeah.
As opposed to snowberry is one that will creep around your yard, but it's also a good wildlife kind of cover plant.
Yeah, we did in the front 2 kind of meadow areas. I'm telling you, it's a park. It's really ridiculous. And we put little flagstone steps around 2 circle areas, and we did a meadow with like yarrow and columbine and lupine. So the pardon our weeds thing, I think people who see anything out of place think you have weeds, I think people don't really sometimes understand that, everything doesn't have to be, as clean as your house.
I have seen a sign. I mean, the other thing to do is just make a sign on a piece of canvas or something, paint up a fun one. And I saw one that said, "Shh, the bees are sleeping."
So Brenda, do you have any rules of thumb for when you can cut back the dead stems? I heard something once with temperatures hit 50, or I don't know what the number was, but do you have any rule of thumb, or do you just leave them up until you can't stand it anymore?
Mine are still up. We're starting to see, so the queen bumblebees,
yeah.
I say queens, the females are the ones that have spent the winter, and they're already out and about now. So I think once you start seeing bees out, you can probably cut them off. Some people say to, leave them year round at different levels, but I have not done that. Especially with the goldenrod, I have a lot of goldenrod in my yard, so I have to cut that out. Yeah, people had a couple of questions. Let's see. Native iris. There's a bunch of species of native iris. The one that seems to be hardiest and doing really well is the Missouriensis, Rocky Mountain blue flag iris, I think might be its common name, but Iris Missouriensis, it's a taller iris, clumping. If you want more of it, you can always just hack it, a shovel split it during the year. So we have some in the display garden. I have some in my yard here in a rain garden. It's in the bottom of the rain garden, so it's, it really doesn't mind it being soggy and wet. And yet I have it in places where it's not so wet as well. So, and then there are some other smaller irises like Iris tenax and Iris, there's some Oregon iris, I think it's called, and Alaska iris that are both smaller ones that I haven't had as much success with, but maybe I haven't been taking care of them. So they're kind of small and haven't really spread or done much, whereas the Iris Missouriensis is spreading some people might not like that it spreads so much, but I think it's great. Then technically the Cicerynchiums, which are the little blue-eyed grass, and the golden-eyed grass, those are both Iris family as well, and they will spread.
Blue-eyed grass.
And they're small. They're really cute. They look like a grass, but they're little clusters, probably only 6 inches tall.
Okay.
Let's take a look at it. I think I saw some yesterday.
I'm a hiker, and I sometimes I get frustrated how much foxglove I see out there. I mean, bees do like it and stuff, but you do see it lining so many of the Forest Service trails. I don't know if it's just come in with feed from horses or just people's boots or how it gets in, but it doesn't seem to go into the forest. We see it in the sun at the edges of trails and in clear cuts. Gosh, when you drive on a Forest Service road through a recent clear cut, it'll just be foxglove everywhere. But I don't know how much damage it's doing to the wilderness. We have so much non-native material everywhere we look. Foxglove is one of the offenders, but it seems like it's a small thing.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was considering foxglove, so I think I'll rule that out.
It's a pretty plant, but there are some checker mallows that are very pretty, that are tall like that. And frankly, even what's the one that space in the name that it's not native, it's hollyhock. At least that doesn't spread a lot, I mean, I've never seen a hollyhock in the wilderness. I've seen foxglove in a lot of wilderness trails, but
I think David and Ruth Neal were also asking about wallflowers. which was another plant that I had on my list. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't remember seeing them a lot. Are you seeing them a lot spreading or something? It sounds like people are.
Mine are very, very prolific, and I cut them back in June and throw out the seeds, and they're just growing everywhere.
Oh.
And they're all different colors. They're yellow and rust and purple and pink, and they're amazing. I could show you pictures, but I don't have them on the screen right now.
Uh-huh. So you're concerned about them
Are they hurting
getting away?
Are they hurting or helping? That's the question.
Are they native?
And I don't know if they're native or not. I've never seen them because we're from Georgia, and I'd never seen them until I came up here.
I do not think they're native.
That's the question. Are they native or are they something that's not good? I don't know.
Well, I see pollinators on them, so I let them stay on my wall, my rock wall. They seem to do well there, but yeah. I don't see them. If Brenda's not familiar with them, and I haven't seen them on trails, I don't think that they're necessarily a problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I just want to add, they were on my list of natives, and my landscaper couldn't find them. But now it sounds like that's another one I want to rule out. So I don't want anything that spreads like that, but they are supposed to be native.
Huh. I don't know. Whenever I'm worried about something being invasive, I always look up the Island County or the Washington State County noxious weed list, because that's a really good thing to check out.
That's a good point. And I'm just trying to think if it's, if it's kept up. So yeah, people get excited about, they think they have mountain ash in their yard, and it turns out it's just European mountain ash. And I see those spreading into the woods terribly now. And I don't think it's on anybody's list, but it's holly.
Yeah, mountain ash. Oh.
That one.
So somebody asked about bracken ferns. What are my thoughts about bracken ferns? I think they're a really interesting fern, but I've never seen anybody deliberately plant one. But I actually thought that, so a nursery person who didn't know her ferns very well sold me some that she said were bracken fern. I put them on my plant sale list thinking, oh, what the heck, give it a try. And I had people buying them, but then when I discovered when they popped up out of the pot and started to grow, I realized they weren't bracken fern. So I contacted via email the people who had purchased them, to give them a refund, an option, or say, these are lady fern instead or something. And at least one person said, oh, I was really hoping for bracken fern. So somebody out there, and I would give them a try. They probably do spread. If you put one in your yard and you had a limited space, they might be a problem because they do, of course, spread underground. So it would be a risk to put one in a small yard. But if you have a forest that you back up to or something, that would be great to have. And a question about native hellebore. So there is, if people are seeing a green hellebore coming up in their yard, there is this crazy exotic, non-native orchid that I swear pops up in the most obscure places. I don't know how it got there. I've seen it deep, in the woods in somebody's yard that's disjunct from any population. It's called green helleborine. And it's a little green orchid, maybe a foot tall at the most. And it comes up in very disjunct places, but it's not native. And I don't know how it gets there. As far as native hellebores, there's corn lily up in the mountains. I've never seen anybody plant that in their yard. Not that it would be, I think it's it might have toxic parts to it or something that makes it not attractive as a landscaping plant. Frankly, a lot of plants have toxicity that, you know, daffodils do too, but we still plant them. So I don't know off the top of my head about any native hellebores. I'm sure there are some besides that corn lily.
And I was surprised at how many plants are toxic.
Yeah.
When I was, designing things, I decided to look into that, and a lot of common things like the heavenly bamboo, Nandina, is highly toxic, and a lot of people, I love that. I used to have it in California, and so I want a wildlife friendly area. And it's just worth the while to look up the toxic plants, because it's surprising how many of them are toxic. And people said to me, well, I'm sure the birds figure out what's toxic, and that may be true, but I don't think, if something is toxic, you're going to see a bird fall off a bush. It's going to fly away and die or be sick. And I didn't want that on my conscience, I guess.
I think what happens with some birds with like the heavenly bamboo is that the berries become toxic as they sit and become alcoholic on the vine. And then it may not be that, maybe a little bit affects the birds, but it also makes them sluggish. So they're more susceptible to predators.
Right. They have a hard time as it is. So
yeah,
I don't need to add to that.
Yeah. But that might be true of a number of berries, even ones that are native. So, right, toxic to us is different, toxic to birds for sure. Yeah, and with birds, it might be something very little that it takes to affect them, or it may not affect them at all. So, I was thinking more that people get really worried about planting. You probably don't even hear about this, but delphinium, or monkshood, they're worried about their grandkids getting into them, or death camas. And I'm like, well, do your grandkids pick up the daffodil bulbs? So, I mean, all parts of the daffodil are poisonous too. So if you see pictures of little kids sucking on a daffodil because it's cute for the photographer, stop them. That's not good.
Oh God.
Yeah. But, we try to teach the kids good habits, not to just eat anything that they see.
Well, I have another question. I don't want to hog it up. I have a swirl of stuff in my brain these days with planting this thing. And I was going to put up a staghorn sumac tree. Audubon recommends it for birds. And then I read that the rhizomes kind of jump and spread. And so I just wondered if anybody had any idea about what to do about that. Somebody said you can put something in around it that's pretty deep, but then somebody else said their staghorn jumped the whole road and planted a rhizome across the road. So I don't know, it just seemed like a perfect tree, and it's pretty cool looking too. But I don't want to start trouble for myself. Any thoughts?
I haven't had any luck corralling things with barriers. But I haven't tried staghorn. I grew up in the Midwest where we had that, but I never have tried to plant it here. Anybody?
Linda Webb used to have a group of them, and they acted like they really wanted to get bigger and bigger. The birds loved them. They always nested in them, and it was really great if you've got the space. But if you have a limited space, I don't know, do you think they'd work in a pot, a large pot?
They did recommend that. Somebody did, but I don't know. I'm overly empathetic. I just feel bad for big things in a pot.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm thinking like at one of the big metal watering troughs or something like that might work. I don't know, but I would be very careful if I had a small yard.
I don't have a small yard. I have a park.
Oh, okay.
It's a park, but I don't want trouble. I don't want to be, you know, I'm not as young as I once was, and I don't want to be out every year trying to figure out what to do with these rhizomes. Something I read said, if you prune it on the top, it will jump more on the bottom. Because I just went into it in detail, and I don't know. And then there's a cultivar called Tiger Eyes, but I don't know. I'd like to just do a native there. And I did plant, I'm a crazy woman, I planted 4 madrone trees with the hope that one will take because they're quite sensitive to transplant. They're crazy, but that's another one that birds love, so.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Brenda's been very generous with her time, but I think that we need to be wrapping this up. I know that people have other things to do tonight. Val, do you have anything?
Well, I liked the comment that you made, Brenda, about the what was it? The Meadow-roo and the horsetail, and the use of plants to get rid of an invasive rather than think about chemicals. There's ways you can do things with plants and out competing and going that route. So I think that was a real valuable learning. And then you covered ocean spray. I love ocean spray. I think it's so beautiful, and I think people don't like it after it dries up. And I had one day I was watching all the chickadees on the dried up ocean spray, and I said, well, this is why you keep it messy. They were just having a party on the ocean spray. It's like it's so beautiful, and then
learn from everybody.
So I had to mention the ocean spray.
What's the other one?
That's great. That's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I'll watch for that on my ocean spray.
But this has been great. I really appreciate you always coming and doing our programs for us and the trainings.
Well, you have such a good engaged group. I'm impressed in all that you've done on Camano Island. So congratulations.
Yes.
Good questions tonight.
Well, thank you for contributing to that, Brenda. You definitely have a big share of the applause.
Well, come on up and see me sometime.
We will. We'll plan a field trip one of these days. That would be
Good.
great.